All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Maria Nicanor. I am an architectural historian and the director of Cooper Hewitt, the Smithsonian Design Museum here in New York City. I suspect all of us here around the table interpreted the prompt slightly differently. So, but I think that will be a good thing, because at the end of the day, I think, Bart, you asked us to talk about armatures. So I'm going to attempt to give you an overview of the armature in which I inhabit and the effects that that has on our work. And again, I reiterate the thanks to Andres and to Bart and Jean for organizing today. It's been great to find old friends, but also meet new ones today in our conversations. So this is my armature, and which sometimes can feel like a corset, but armatures and corsets can be good as well. So to give you a little bit of a quick overview of the history to understand what we're trying to do with this particular museum, which, if you're not familiar with it, is the National Museum of Design and Architecture, of course, of the United States. It's one of 21 Smithsonian museums, and most of which you might know from the Mall in Washington, D.C. Design and architecture are not in the Mall. We are here in New York City for reasons of the creation and the history of this institution. So let me walk you a little bit through the history of the institution and why it's here. We are today located in the Andrew Carnegie Mansion, which is on Fifth Avenue and 89th Street, just in front of Central Park, next door to the Guggenheim. This is our current home, but this is not where the museum started. The museum is also, I should say, a national American museum, but our collection is very much global and quote-unquote encyclopedic, although it really isn't. We have many, many gaps and blind spots, but we collect everything in between these two objects, this little tiny Faience cup, which is about this size, and one of our latest acquisitions, the COVID-19 model. And I consider that design is everything that happened in between these two things, as well as the ideas and the stories that have happened between them. The museum has a deeply European-centric origin in its collection. It was started by the Hewitt sisters, two collectors who set out to create a museum very much based on the model of the Decorative Arts Museum, very much like the Musée des Arts Décoratifs in Paris. And for them, the built environment that you were asking us to situate looks something like this. This is how they interpreted their built environment and what they wanted to preserve. The museum started actually at the Cooper Union and was the Cooper Union Museum for the Arts of Decoration. The two sisters were the granddaughters of an industrialist, Peter Cooper, and for years they amassed this collection, which eventually ended up in the Cooper Union downtown, which you know well, and the Cooper Union Museum was created on the 4th floor of Cooper Union. And this is, I love this little piece of history as well. It's not quite a manifesto, but it's really just explaining what they were trying to do and who their audience was. And this collection of objects and their intent to display it was very much directed to architects, designers, decorators, and artisans, all in the same category. And they go on to explain how this is a museum that's going to be open. It's open late so that working artisans and craftspeople can have access to these objects. And they also talk about, at the very end of the letter, how there are no catalogs are necessary. Every object is there for you to handle, to touch. And the museum opens in 1897 to great fanfare in New York City as a museum to promote industrial art. This is how it looked, and I think we've there's been references today about models of museums that are using the open display method as well, and our friends at the Biennale, of course, have done this in quite an incredible way. But this is what the Hewitt sisters did in the middle of the 1800s. They wanted people to see a lot of the collection. They wanted people to touch a lot of the collection. They were calling this a living lab. So very much ideas that we think we might have invented today, but honestly, they did it first. This way of displaying, which kind of puts Rem's elements of architecture to shame in some way. Again, they did it in the 1800s already, and very much were thinking of their understanding of the built environment, right? Like this is what for them was the built environment and how they thought it should be collected, and shown for inspiration of makers, really. So a few more images of how those installations were looking. Then to rewind, go very fast forward very quickly, the Cooper Union Museum couldn't keep the collection anymore. The museum closes for many years. There's a question about what to do with this collection. There's a questions of selling it. The Metropolitan was going to buy it, a few other institutions, the collection which would have been disseminated and separated and broken apart. And at that point, the Smithsonian Institution intervenes, and the Carnegie Corporation donates the Carnegie Mansion, the former home of Andrew Carnegie, to the Smithsonian Institution for the price of $1. And suddenly this becomes the location where the National Collection of Design for the Country goes to live. It's of course a residential building, and this was what it was meant to contain, right? To remind ourselves of like that notion of the built environment and what that might have meant. This is how it looks when you try to collect all of this built environment. What do we all do with this? The collection of the country, which every time I say this sentence aloud, I startle myself, is not shown at all in the museum. It is sitting in storage, like in an undisclosed location, not too far away from here. And these are the treasures of the country in terms of architecture, design, decorative arts, fragments, pieces, drawings, all the sort of categories, traditional categories of design that you can think about are in storage. They, of course, have come out over the years for temporary exhibitions, but it's an amassing and a collection that is living, that is growing, and we talk a lot about, and I was very interested in the panel before this one about how we collect now, because we continue to acquire and this collection continues to expand. This is our current campus today at the museum and the adjacent townhouses where the offices and some of the collections are kept. And to go back to that idea of like everything between these two objects is what the collection looks like. So the collection looks a little bit more like this today. We've been pushing the boundaries of what those decorative arts are, what the built environment is, and what material production really represents. And in these ways, we sort of redefine what the mission of the museum is constantly and what it means to build a national collection that is global in scale and expands across so many different fields and mediums, because architecture is not just the one. I'm responsible for many fields in which I'm not an expert either. I come from the world of architecture, but of course we are responsible for so many other fields under our umbrella, from fashion to digital product design, graphic design, drawings and prints. Whoops. Not sure what that was. A digital born object. Oh, no. So I was going to show you an exhibition. Maybe we'll leave it like that. Look at all those question marks. What does it mean to be a design museum today? And I just wanted to end a little bit by telling you how we try to push the boundaries and from an institution that is very much rooted in a very traditional Eurocentric model of a museum. What are we doing today in this armature that we've been given as a national museum to push the boundaries of what it means to be a museum? And we do that sometimes through exhibitions, but mostly through a variety of formats. What you're looking at right now is an exhibition on our recent acquisitions that we did recently, and we ask these kinds of questions that I'm very interested in about what are the defining themes of our time, which I think is what I'm interested in looking at from the platform that we have. You might have seen as well the recent design triennial, Making Home, that was curated by Alexandra Cunningham-Cameron and Cristina de Leon and Michelle Wilkinson. And that was another way in which we are trying to push these boundaries of what design means by having a much more expansive definition of what we do, and also by using with generosity the platform that we have through commission making, for example. So I showed you all the objects and the treasures that we have, but we're also a center of production, and it's exhibitions like our recent triennial and others where we are able to also redefine, push, and just go a little bit against the grain and the baggage of this history that we've been given to try and redefine the armature in which we exist, which again sometimes can seem limiting, but we make it our job to really break down those boundaries and just try to look much further than what history has given us, right? It's an imperfect armature, the one we have for sure. It leaks quite literally, but also sometimes figuratively. I failed to mention that we're part of the federal government, of course, and therefore very bound to rules of the current administration. So there's all kinds of leaks going on. But nonetheless, it's a very worthy platform. In as much as we can open it to others. So I think I'm interested in talking of armatures with a sense of generosity, of like opening these platforms that do not really belong to us, but belong to all of you and to our audiences and many other people, because I do think that there's a civic responsibility in using these platforms so others can use them. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Bart and GSAPP. It's wonderful to be here, and thank you all for all your stamina, a long afternoon. I would like to very briefly talk about an ongoing multi-year research project that my team and I and our co-curator Ike Mokoye have been working on, titled Architects of Liberation, Modernism in West Africa. And I would like to make 2 points as they relate to the stipulation of the title of the panel. What do we talk about when we talk about the built environment? I would like to address this question from a geopolitical point of view, and the question of the curatorial armatures that we're employing. I would like to talk about the mediums of the architecture exhibition. And to start, I would like actually to start with an ongoing exhibition, very beautifully curated by my wonderful colleagues Evangelos and Paola, who are, I think, here in the audience, currently on view, The Many Lives of the Naga King Capsule Tower. This is one of the very few instances in an architecture exhibition where we can actually show an actual piece of architecture. And all of us who deal with architecture exhibitions, we always know, of course, that we usually have to work with representations, and I'm going to come back to that later. And of course, it's a work of Japanese architecture, and that's the first point I would like to make in terms of geopolitics. I think MoMA and most Western institutions for almost all of our histories have focused on, the global West and those places in the world that have been allies, geopolitical allies in the Cold War with the United States, including Latin America and Japan. And so MoMA has a very long history of many, many exhibitions that look at Japanese architecture, at craft from Latin America, architecture from Latin America, and so on and so forth. What we have not done until very, very recently is look at a part of the world which was known in the Cold War period as the Third World. The Third World meaning neither the capitalist West nor the communist East, but those places around the globe who were taking as it were, neutral position or a malleable position, neither wanting to align themselves with capitalism or communism. And for those of you who have followed my work at MoMA over the last 10 years, I have made 2 exhibitions along those lines. First about Yugoslavia, Concrete Utopia, and then the Project Independence, which was about South Asia. And so the Africa research that is going to eventually lead into a show is the third part of this trilogy. We are going to capture the moment of liberation. 1960 is the moment where 17 countries in Africa declare political independence from their former colonial powers. And we are very interested in exploring how the politics of liberations, how modern architecture was an agent in shaping the politics of liberation and, giving form to the aspirations of newly formed independent societies. Here are the political leaders. Many of them were leaders of the liberation movement and who then became the first presidents or prime ministers of their respective countries. The exhibition is focusing on Western Africa, specifically these 7 countries. I'm not going to go into detail why. But now I would like to come to the second question about the mediums of architecture. And of course, architecture exhibitions very often deal with models, with architectural drawings, historical archival materials. And what we have found to be very productive over the last few years is to work with contemporary photographers, filmmakers who we commission we sent them on a mission to take photographs, to film, footage of the buildings and cities and places that we're interested in. And so I'm showing you here commissioned a work by the Ivoirian French photographer François-Xavier Gebray, who has been working for us over these past few years. I'm showing you here one of the images of one of the key buildings that we're going to present in our exhibition, the so-called pyramid in Abidjan, in Côte d'Ivoire. And we're interested in this take from an artistic point of view in a number of reasons. First of all, of course, an artistic interpretation adds a layer to the historical document. But of course, there's also the question of the temporality, right? This allows us to show a building not the way it is conceptualized at the moment of its design, which we're of course also doing by showing architectural material, archival material, but rather in the way it is now in the present, part of everyday lives of the citizens that inhabit these places or don't inhabit it. As you can see, this is a ruin. It's sort of an inadvertent vertical garden. As you can see, the trees are growing on the facade. That's not intended, but that's very much part of the message. And that brings me to the third point why we think this is interesting, the question of preservation. We're very interested in articulating the precarious situation that many modernist buildings around the world are in, not just in Africa, but also, in this country, for example, by highlighting the traces that the passage of time has left on these buildings. I'm showing you another building, the same thing. Here is a photo, an archival photo from the late 1970s of the International Trade Fair in Lagos, and then here what François-Xavier Gebray came back with his interest in texture and in materiality, and again in the passage of time, an interior of this very spectacular building here. Or then one more example, the Immeuble Faisal by the Senegalese, preeminent Senegalese architect Sheikh Ngom, who just passed away a few weeks ago with this really stunning high-rise in one of the key high-rises in Senegal, and here's another one. And the way we're interested in showing these contemporary photographs is not just as another instance of putting something on the wall, but to really sort of use them as to spatialize them. I'm showing you here an example from the Yugoslavia exhibition from 2018, where we're basically using these large-scale photo blobs as a room divider that frames this part of the exhibition. The second, and this brings me already to my last point. I was mentioning photography, but I would also like to talk about film. We have, over the recent years, worked more and more with including film, which of course is probably the most useful way to engage with sort of the spatial quality of architecture, because film allows us to move through spaces, to see a building from different angles and so forth. We had the exhibition New York New Publics a few years ago as the first instance of the Architecture Now series, which looked at work from New York City. Here, this very beautiful work by N architects at Jones Beach, and we commissioned for each of the 7 or 8 projects that we featured a film. I'm showing you just here a very brief excerpt. And again, this question of spatializing the filmic experience here in a gallery installation from the opening of the new building of MoMA, where we showcased a fragment of the original UN curtain wall facade, but then through that you could see an excerpt from Tati's Playtime, which looks at the same sort of kind of post-war industrial, complex architecture from a very sort of humoristic point of view. And the idea here was here really to activate this fragment of a facade as if you were sort of looking into somebody's, living room or office and experiencing the nightmarish life of office workers in the post-war period, including at the UN, I guess. And one last example, also, of course, multi-channel installations. This was a collaboration or, another commission by an artist, by an artist, which was the introductory gallery to the Yugoslavia exhibition, which used found footage in order to introduce the notion of the creation of a new multicultural society, multi-ethnic society in 3 minutes. And that's my brief presentation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. First of all, a big thank you to Bart, to Andres, and Jean for this great invitation. It's really wonderful to be here amongst colleagues and collaborators. My name is Abraham Thomas. I'm the Architecture and Design and Decorative Arts Curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but based in the Modern and Contemporary Art Department, which I think is kind of part of what I wanted to talk about in terms of this idea of armatures and the context within which we talk about architecture. So, in responding to this idea of these armatures and these sort of institutional frameworks, I've been thinking a lot about this idea of the architectural fragment and how that exists within a museum as wide-ranging with its multiple contexts as the Met. Our colleague Irene mentioned earlier this idea of the encyclopedic museum, or rather the kind of the way in which that leaves a bit of a lump in our throat when we say that phrase, because it's obviously not true to have an encyclopedic museum. And I found it very interesting how she picked out this idea of what exists between these departments and how often the act of collecting is often incomplete. So for that and many other reasons, I've been thinking about the fragment as it exists within the Met as a way of thinking of architecture within the museum. This idea that when you walk through the galleries of the Met, within almost every single collection department, there's this idea of the presence of architecture through these objects and fragments. And so I partly wanted to kind of reflect a little bit about this idea of the architectural fragment, but also to speak about a project which we'll be opening in about 2 years' time, which involves a new kind of entrance into the museum, where I hope that we will be installing a kind of installation of fragments from across the museum's holdings of these kind of fragments. And so one of the things that I find interesting about the fragment is that, of course, we have, whether it's the Greek and Roman galleries or the Islamic art department, the arts of Oceania or the medieval collections, you have these objects on display, but of course, we also are a museum which is very rich with the kind of history of the period room, which I think is also an interesting example of this idea of the fragment, but instead of being an object, this is a kind of a fragment of kind of inhabited space, and there's this other layer of kind of curatorial interest where these spaces immediately become a place of, almost partly fictional in the way that they act like a stage set. They're obviously divorced from their kind of architectural built context. We as curators know that many of these objects and these spaces, whether it's a sort of a Mamluk era Damascus room or a Renaissance Italian studiolo, these are spaces that can often be kind of filled with objects which aren't true to the origins of that space. And so we're already kind of playing with this idea of the partial picture or the kind of fragment of an object or a space being already something that's playing with kind of truth or reality. We of course also have these kind of huge examples of kind of building fragments, whether it's the American wing where we have this literal kind of skin of a 19th century bank building operating at a scale where it's a fragment perhaps of a building, but it's working at the scale of the actual museum building scale as well. Or of course, our famous Temple of Dendur, which was transported and through kind of a series of kind of diplomatic competitions through the construction of the Aswan Dam, ended up here at the Met. And so we're kind of dealing with these various ideas of scale, which is another thing I find very interesting with this idea of the fragment, where we have this kind of extraordinary sort of almost postmodernist statement on architecture with the concatenation and sort of shrinking of this column from the Temple of Artemis at Sardis, or this kind of barley twist column from the medieval period, where they're all playing with ideas of perception and scale and reality. And so the project which I sort of wanted to focus on perhaps a little bit involves it's one of the major capital projects we're doing at the Met. Our department are very involved with Frida Escobedo's project for the Tang Wing for modern and contemporary art, but a project which is also underway is our project with Peterson Rich Office, which is, for those of you who might have seen the press conference for the new Costume Institute exhibition, you'll know that they are designing the new gallery for the Costume Institute, but a phase 2 of that will be an entire kind of transformation of our kind of the entry points and creation of new areas of public realm into the Great Hall. So we will have a new street level entrance at sort of 83rd Street, sorry. So rather than going up the steps, you actually have a kind of street level entrance. So I think that says a lot about this idea of permeability and kind of access into the museum. So these new areas of public realm, which will also include new restaurants, new dining and retail. There will be a new experience of entering into the Great Hall via a staircase. And in that general area of new public realm, there is this idea to have a series of views into the collection. So that's where this idea of the fragment will come to play, where we will have, perhaps inspired by my time at the Biennale and then later on at the Sohn Museum, this idea of this kind of dense arrangement of fragments and casts will sort of populate this kind of entry point into the museum as an introduction to the museum's collections. And one of the things I'm hoping that we can explore is this idea of what happens naturally within the galleries, where you have these kind of areas of charged energy, where you have these thresholds between collection departments. Normally this is of course separated by vast distances across our kind of 4-block wide museum campus, but it's kind of interesting where you almost have this kind of jarring transition from the British galleries via medieval and then into the American wing. And so I'm hoping by bringing these objects together, which we very rarely do at the museum, it's very much still a very traditional model of kind of siloed like department collections, and it's also kind of inherent the kind of these kind of power structures and histories of which galleries are primary, and you have kind of Greek and Roman and medieval kind of on the first floor. This I hope will be a chance to sort of bring together objects in the way that creates a dialogue which doesn't exist normally in the museum. So we're hoping that we can, for example, we have here an example of an architectural panel from our oceanic collections, a wonderful Jali screen from the Islamic collection, and a tile panel, a sort of wall panel of faience tiles from the Egyptian collections. I'm hoping that this sort of dense arrangement of fragments from the collection will be a way of creating almost like wormholes across time and different cultural periods through a kind of very tight visual dialogue, which we normally don't offer in the museum. And I think, especially with those examples of the large-scale fragments that we saw earlier on, the idea of the fragment also brings up for me this idea of the sheer impossibility of collecting architecture. And I think Martino kind of alluded to this earlier on with the idea of the capsule tower being kind of a rare example of the actual sort of dwelling unit being at full scale and being in the collection. But there often is this idea of either architecture being mediated or you're collecting something that's incomplete, which I think again speaks to these histories of collecting within the museum, and of course also this idea of provenance as well as a key topic which I think comes up with the kind of focus on these fragments which have been sort of taken from these original contexts. And so our hope is that this will be a way of kind of with this installation of architectural fragments, with this new area of public realm, a new way of entering the museum that isn't up these kind of very imposing steps, this will be a way of somehow kind of collapsing together these previously very predetermined, controlled ways of showcasing the collections. I look forward to, we look forward to sharing that with you when it opens in a few years' time. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, Andres and Bart and Jean for this invitation. And then probably I'm the one flew most far away. And then bear with me, I'm a little bit dizzy. But anyway, and then also I might slightly misinterpreted that can be the topic because following Martino and then. Abraham also could have talked a fragment, but I will talk a little bit different. But it's also for the audience here in New York, probably don't know what is M+, who we are, so I will explain a little bit about M+, and sorry, it should be one picture of the building. I also forgot to put it in. So just imagine, or you can just Google M+, you can just see the building. So M+ is a new museum, and then it's Asia's Global Museum of Contemporary Visual Culture in Hong Kong, and then we opened 2021. But the idea of this visual culture museum was conceived in 2006. And following a long public discussion, the consultation, Hong Kong people loved that. And then use of the premier waterfront reclamation, which happened soon after the handover from British to China. And then it was decided to use as for the culture development. It's a 40 hectare, it's a very huge development. As you see, like it is also the government, how they want to really make this new Hong Kong's image through from a manufacturer city to financial city. So now it's to the culture. So those kind of missions come with a baggage as well. First director, Lars Nitbe, was hired 2011. That's the kind of, we started the team, and then it was international architecture competition. Herto de Moulon won the design competition in 2012. So the scale was very similar to Tate, modern, including a switch house, 65,000 square meter museum dedicated collecting, exhibiting, interpreting the visual art, design architecture, moving image of a 20th, 21st century from Asia and beyond. And M+ is committed to advancing the critical research and expanding a narrative of visual culture in Asia and beyond. and also the gathering, generating the new knowledge, and the presenting unexplored perspective. Also to create the really mission to create more inclusive canon. We also discussed a little bit in the morning about the canon, currently a little bit under scrutiny all over the world, but we don't have this baggage of to scrutinize, so we can have a kind of fresh start. And then to this the topic, so I will I mentioned just one little section in our inaugural opening display from our collection, so I took just one wall technically. The exhibition was called Think Space Interaction, but this section called Formal Informal Architecture. So I wanted to bring, because how we juxtapose the work, it's really for the audience perspective. So M+ is a very new museum. People don't have even habit to go to see the design architecture at the museum. So we just have to make it the threshold very low. So it's not so much about the understanding each work, but we work what they want to take away after the museum visit. So this section discussed it's the wisdom of the city. So that's kind of idea. That's what we want to, people, if they get, city can have a little idea, then I'm very happy with that. But the wisdom of the city is through which is coexisting formal and informal initiative. The how built environment has responded to the social and economic change in the regional context, how the architecture gives us a window onto the question deeply relevant to our life today. And then, so this was the wall, and then on this, the background, it's a, sorry, it's a very pixelated picture, but the Mayfair scene, the complex, it was built, completed in 1978. It was Hong Kong's first contained residency community, 99-tower complex. It was considered the largest private housing complex in the world at the time in 78. Very highly efficient. The bus station, you can walk from A to the other corner without get wet at all, with the schools and the nursery and the shopping mall and so forth. So, but this high density and high rise vision were realized through very ambitious financing, because it's a private, also the practical necessity. So this new typology was born, so like this, in Hong Kong case, it's a very scarcity of the land, so very highly dense, the stacking multiple housing. And then the Mayfair became the world famous in 78, but at the same time, Hong Kong was very famous. So sorry for terrible picture quality. But Kowloon Wallet City. So this was, again, Hong Kong was super famous, and the superimposed on this is a kind of informal initiative. So the Kowloon Wallet City, this was a picture taken by British photographer Ian Lambert, and then to document this informal user-constructed environment before it was demolished in 1993. A few years before the handover. This house was over 35,000 people were living there in one technical block. Residents constructed around 350 buildings with very limited involvement of the architects, providing 10 to 14 stories high building with a labyrinth areas, and then with a central courtyard. So it's again, there was a kind of non-design, but there was kind of highly system was created. Although the Kowloon Wallet City was also remembered and also romanticized as a very lawless diaspora environment, filling with gangs and gambling, opium dens, leaking pipes, and then a chaotic electric wire. However, it was a remarkable itself, a self-managed community with schools, dentists, shops, and temples and factories. So accommodating, as looking at the Hong Kong, the city, to accommodate the coexistence, this formal, the informal architecture, city makes more dynamic and inclusive. I mean, although today we know this Kowloon Wallet City is not possible, but however, there is something we can learn from here. And then on that wall, we have also juxtaposed with a project, a design campus we built in 2016. This was a project done in Dharabi, one of the largest slums in the world in India. So the Mumbai-based design studio, Urbs, so they're a research collective, and then they're also looking at the local wisdom, again, the knowledge of artisans and builders to improve their living conditions, almost like this almost hopeless situation. Instead of waiting top-down change, they need a both. They have to bottom-up, top-down, they have to collaborate together, otherwise the situation will not really bring any change. And according to the UN estimate, there's only one toilet per 1,400 people. But that was 2006. So I guess today it's like maybe it's decreased, but it's still a very extreme situation. So this project was also challenging the negative perception of informal settlements to really empower the local builders to reimagine what's the house they want to live in. And then here, the last project, the Urban Village, 2005. So the Urbanus is a Shenzhen-based architects. So the 2005, that's really marking the Shenzhen's very breakneck speed towards the Olympic. They were swiping urban villages, they're building skyscrapers. So the Urbanus proposal was actually to keep these small urban villages because it's their community, their systems, and then wisdom, but maybe can just add what is missing. But this was not selected, was not realized. But today, this is 2005, 20 years after, in China, it's completely go for this. So this is by Yin Urbans in the same city, 2023, it's realized. Now the China was so quickly like compensating what they have built and break. And then now it's all about the adaptive reuse and the sustainability and heritage and so forth. So that's also the example. I think it's a museum collection. It's interesting also, as Paola mentioned, the Art of Now. It's also very important, but also what will tell, like if we look at the 2005 object, and if we look at today's perspective, what has changed, what the society has brought in. So those kind of perspectives is, I think it's important. So, and then, yeah, so that's that. And then in the last, I just believe curatorial framework is always determined very, very carefully where you place in the vantage point. In my case, at the moment in Hong Kong, even though I'm not from Hong Kong, but that's also depending on the institution's vision, mission, or project, Biennale, where you were situated in, but it's very much where you're participating and use that vantage point to the audience or collection or exhibition. Thank you.
Lucky last. That's good. Hi, I'm Ewan. I'm from Melbourne, from the National Gallery of Victoria, where I head up contemporary art, design and architecture. And before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land upon which I live and work, and upon which the NGV is built and operates. I'm just going to provide a very quick bit of context. The NGV is the largest, oldest gallery in Australia, audience of 3.2 million people. We opened a design department in 2015, so it's a very new department, design and architecture, which I head up. All of our team, no one has any formal training as a curator. We all come out of the built environment sector, from journalism, design journalism, and my background, originally environmental science, and then into curating biennials, festivals, and things like that. So I joined this institution, I suppose, with the intent of using that kind of generative mindset that you have in festivals and biennials to see what we could do with this platform. So I'm just going to read because it's going to be much easier. For me, this question, how might we position the built environment within larger armatures, asks us to recognize architecture as something shaped by cultural histories, ecological systems, and collective futures. It encourages us to widen the frame, to bring architecture into conversations that extend beyond design itself and to invite broader publics into these conversations. The three projects I'll discuss quickly today discuss this approach from different directions. One looks to deep indigenous time, another speculates at the scale of the planet, and the third brings these perspectives back to the river that defines our city, Melbourne. Together, they suggest some ways curatorial practice can position architecture within the larger context of meaning and care. The first project, In Absence, by Indigenous artist Ioannis Scarce and Edition Office, asks us to reconsider the foundations of architectural history in Australia. Responding to the legacy of terra nullius, which is the British legal interpretation that Australia was not settled and occupied by the Indigenous people, which gave them permission to colonise, the work foregrounds the depth and sophistication of Indigenous design, engineering and agriculture practice that long predate colonisation. Its 9-metre timber tower refers to traditional eel traps, Indigenous structures that supported sustainable, large-scale food systems. Inside, the curved, dark chambers recall the forms of permanent homes and the interiors of trees used for smoking and preserving food. Suspended glass murnong, or yams, elements that reference water, sap, eel oil, and the mapping of country, while the surrounding planting points to millennia of agricultural knowledge. Rather than reconstructing a past architecture, In Absence uses contemporary spatial and material strategies to create a space where overlooked histories can be acknowledged and contemplated. Disciplined by grounding it in, what am I doing? Have I got the wrong page? No, don't worry. Let's go. The second project, Liam Young's Planet City, shifts from deep time to deep future. We commissioned this in 2019 for the NGV Triennial in 2020. The work imagines a single, hyperdense city designed to house the entire global population. By reversing the pattern of planetary sprawl, the project suggests a thought experiment. What might happen if humanity consolidated into one place, allowing most of the Earth to regenerate? Young describes the work as a fiction shaped like a city. It is built from existing technologies, renewable energy systems, closed-loop agriculture, recycled materials, and developed through collaboration with scientists, economists, Indigenous advisors, and others. It's not presented as a viable plan, but as a platform for thinking about scale, responsibility, and the choices ahead of us. The project has travelled widely, including to the Tribeca Film Festival, and Young's TED Talk has reached more than 2.2 million visitors. And of course, we're very happy it was collected by MoMA. This reach highlights something important. Architectural ideas, when presented through accessible media, can engage broader publics in the conversations and questions that shape our collective future. In this way, Planet City situates architecture within planetary armatures, climate science, migration, resource flows, and cultural narratives, and demonstrates how speculation can be a productive tool for widening architectural discourse. The third project, Reimagining Birrarung, or the Yarra River, an exhibition from last year, brings these expanded perspectives into a local context. Developed in partnership with the Birrarung Council and the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung Cultural Heritage Aboriginal Corporation, the project looks 50 years ahead to imagine the future of Melbourne's river system. Urban rivers across the world are increasingly understood as living systems rather than infrastructures to be controlled and exploited. The Birrarung has been significantly altered over time, straightened, constrained, and degraded, and this project examines how it might be regenerated as an ecological and cultural corridor. Through research, mapping, landscape architecture, and speculative design proposals, Reimagining Birrarung explores floodplain restoration, public access, biodiversity, and cultural connections across the catchment. It asks a key question, which is very important. What might a living river want? The Yarra River has just been acknowledged under law in Victoria as an integrated living entity. This simple shift in perspective encourages visitors to think about shared stewardship and to imagine futures shaped collaboratively with the river rather than imposed upon it. The project resonates strongly with Melburnians, suggesting a public readiness for more integrated and long-term thinking about the environments that support us. And I suppose we make our small contribution to continue the conversation and to push the window forward. Across these three projects, architecture is positioned within broader systems, historical, planetary, and ecological. In Absence, reframes our origins. Planet City prompts us to consider the scale of change that the future may demand. And Reimagining Birrarung connects these reflections to the responsibilities we hold to place. Thank you.
I think the panel is sort of positioning itself, or at least the idea is quite broad and somewhere between what you just ended with and the bucket that you showed, I think, at the Cooper-Hewitt, which was sort of collecting the leaks and at the same time makes visible in a sort of Hans Haake way all the systems, governmental, ecological, maintenance that are also so part of. So I'm trying to, what I would like to do is try to situate exhibition making, curatorial projects within that sort of like spectrum. Let's say, of course, I find it fascinating that we have representatives from let's say, institutions originating in the 19th century, modern institutions, 21st century sort of state institutions, etc. So maybe to start, which was not intended, but many of you spoke about the fragment, which I think that's so obvious that we should sort of talk about. I see Jorge is in the room, which I'm sure also will be very interested in this. But basically, I mentioned already the leaks. That for me, that's kind of a fragment. But I'm interested in the distinction, if there is any, for you between, let's say, the fragment and the commission, because the commissioning also came up. So there seems to be a sort of very different role within exhibition making for each of these. And maybe more specifically, I'm also interested in sort of the museum or the collection or the exhibition, let's say, as large, as a whole, understood as a fragment of a larger societal system, which I think with the sort of entrance, Abraham, that you described, it could be understood maybe as such, versus the sort of displaying of fragments from as a sort of more like in a representational role. So I wonder if you could speak about that. To what extent do you see yourself as a fragment of the built environment, or do you still consider yourself to be sort of operating outside of that? So maybe we can start there. Not all at once.
I'm happy to start if that gets us going. We commission fragments, actually. I think that's I suppose a lot of, like maybe 80% of the work that we do would be newly commissioned work. And we're very lucky to be in an institution that has the resources at this moment in time to do that. And I suppose it began because when I started, there was no space inside the gallery that we were allowed to exhibit anything. We had a new team and a program that was maybe 4 years booked up. So I looked at all the spaces in the building that no one else was using, the garden, the courtyards, etc. And we started, actually our first major commissioning was we've done 10, an architecture commission program similar to PS1 or Serpentine, and then we collect elements of that. But increasingly we're investing in people who are trying to push research forward and other things, and collecting those as sort of markers of time. And I think they're just as important when we think about in the future the fragments that we already hold in our historical collection. This is a continuum, and less we're collecting fragments of existing projects. It's more maybe collecting speculation and research, but it's applied.
Yeah, one thing I didn't mention when I described this new Great Hall public realm project with these fragments is that we will also be commissioning new architectural elements we're working with 4 architectural practices, which we hope we'll be able to announce at some point soon, for mostly buildings that have now opened, and these have been specifically chosen so they can kind of generate a dialogue with some of these other forms from the historical collections, whether that's around ideas of architectural sort of geometry, ornamental form, or structural engineering. So that will be a really important dialogue to kind of bring that kind of idea of the fragment to the present day. But I'm also very interested in this idea of commissioning and how we collect these fragments, because I think there's something about the fragment which operates very much as a sort of like a prototype or a test piece almost. When I curated the Lauren Halsey Roof Garden Commission in 2023, some of you I hope will have seen it. There was this large kind of sort of Afrofuturist inflected kind of temple with these kind of engraved panels covering every single surface. So we acquired actually a test piece that Lauren had created as part of a, almost like a 10-year process of building up to that full-scale prototype, which she kind of built and kind of landed like a spaceship onto the roof of the Met. So for us to acquire, we didn't want to acquire a kind of a fragment from the project itself, but rather a piece that sort of predated that was in her mind a kind of sketch, test piece, a sort of piece of speculation that was in some way representing this dream of building at a full scale, which she now is going to do in LA actually on a much larger scale. So I think the idea of the fragment as a prototype, as a powerful tool is really important.
I brought up the idea of the commissions because it's a format that I'm interested in doing more and more, precisely to insert ourselves in creating in modes of new production, and using our platform and the funding sources, quite frankly, that we have to channel those resources towards new production. So some of my slides, unfortunately, were missing, but I was going to talk about triennials as methods to do that, and sometimes triennials, of course, include pieces of work that are already existing, but when you utilize the commissioning method, which is very complicated in a federal government armature, but we wanted to push that and do that further. I want to do that further because it's a way of making sure that we're including the new creators of that new built environment, and actually transferring those funds directly. We were talking about this earlier, how do we make sure that we're not just adding to this collection, but contributing to the community of creators that might not have those resources that we have access to. Commissioning sometimes fragments, but oftentimes also full-fledged pieces is a very good mechanism to do that, and again, to include others into the platforms that we are responsible for.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by this idea of the commissioned fragment, and maybe my Germanic upbringing has somehow resists a little bit this idea, because for me the fragment is very much associated with romanticism and the ruin, the aesthetic, and so I think the fragment for me carries a degree of melancholy or even nostalgia, and I think that's actually part of the reason why they're so powerful as exhibits in an exhibition, because they remind us that the thing, as it were, is now gone, and we mourn it, and we, look at the beauty of something, that has passed, and, we obviously have a specialist here in the room who could talk much more about that. So obviously we have, modern fragments, which is in itself maybe a bit of a contradiction, but yes, I think we can also be melancholic for modernism. And what you're talking about for me is more almost like installations or so that are, I would distinguish that. For me, that those are not fragments. So those are commissioned installations or artworks maybe. So but I'm intrigued by this idea of thinking the commission and the fragment as two things, or two sides of a coin somehow.
The fragment for us, we have quite a few fragments, including Nakagin and the entire sushi bar, but we see more like the evidence of the social history and also the engineering history. What was material was, so popular, one type of glass in 80s, which is gone today, or the Sony building facade I have acquired. It was a very architecture-wise, Ashiwara Yoshinobu is a very important architect, but he was not star architect. But that generation of architect made the Tokyo city so clean and neat and beautiful. So haven't been put any attention before. So, but this is like a little tiny bit of aluminum extruded facade. They will tell the story, why it was so minimal, so nothing, but if you look at it so carefully, very uniquely bespoken, that aluminum extrusion in that time in 70s. So again, it's very much about the material sample, about the technology what was, and then also the Expo Tower by Kikutake we have, which is today is technology-wise, they can do so much more advanced, but that was most technologically advanced aluminum cast and the metal ball joint. So I think that kind of the story, what we look at today or in 20 years, what evoke like a little bit of nostalgia, but it's through technological material research that's in our focus.
Okay, thank you. And maybe to build upon this conversation a little bit, and to build upon the question of let's say preservation, I think there's the example of the river and let's say the preservation of the sort of or the rehabilitation of this sort of natural ecosystem on the one hand, but there's also this fascinating, I think, example you showed, Eco, where there's this sort of reversal going on that, like, sort of through your and other sort of curatorial work, all of a sudden the built environment actually is really impacted with the urbanus example, where the preservation is not really preservation, but it's going back to earlier forms. At least that's how I understood your point. So I'm very interested in this. Maybe these are becoming two different questions, but more specifically, three of these institutions are in New York, Hong Kong, Melbourne. I don't know the context so much, but there are certain real estate realities, let's say, that, when we talk about preservation and those kind of things. So I'm wondering if maybe you could speak a little bit to how you see different modes of preservation with regards to the sort of realities and consistent real estate pressures. Of course, I'm thinking also of the MAD, the new buildings, etc., these new entrances.
When you mentioned real estate, it's actually the Birurung exhibition was really quite curious because it's something we kind of built on for about 10 years. We run Melbourne Design Week every May. And the river had been a recurring theme, and we realized that there was an opportunity to bring, so we commissioned practices to basically, there was a lot of research, and then it was to develop speculative projects. But one thing that was really cool was that one practice, sort of after doing mapping and stuff, it was simple conclusion, but we realized that there were 12 private golf courses along the river in the city. So Melbourne's a very green city. The river runs through 12 private golf courses with 4,000 members, and you have to pay to be a member. 4,000 members in total. So we started this little sort of internal campaign within the exhibition about, with, importantly, the local traditional owners. We said, how do you feel about the fact that that land is private land? It's actually Crown land, but it's licensed to these golf courses. And what's come about, I suppose, as a consequence of that, when you're talking about real estate and that idea of regeneration, is there's now actually activity going on to try and say these shouldn't be golf courses anymore. It would be the largest urban parkland in any city in the world, pretty much. It's a huge area of land, but it's a floodplain, so no one's allowed to build on it. But I'm always curious about that kind of, you don't know what impact something as simple as an exhibition might have. It's just a matter of, and when you're talking about armatures, it's actually convening different groups of people. There are so many interest groups around a river, and if you can get them all together, we did a lot of work. I mean, I took kayak tours up the river with people, but that convening thing of an institution and how you can actually make it a topic on the radio, on the TV, in the paper, it's really, really interesting.
Eco?
I mean, the real estate is Hong Kong is you cannot avoid, really. I mean, if you don't look at the Mayfair show was also private real estate, because otherwise no architecture, really. So it's the last year when we hosted the ICAMS was the first, the Birgit from Norway. He could say, this has no architecture, this city. No, it is like a social housing and real estate, that's all architecture. So we have to train ourselves to look at what is the innovations and what has been the meaning in the society. So then there is a lot of the real estate program has very interesting stories. So one, for example, is the one apartment tower by Rokoyum, and then they were, Hong Kong is a very hilly city, so they were kind of how shall I say, smashed like 3 small areas to make it one big compound. So then there's entrance from the Queens Road and the Hollywood Road. So then in order to do that, almost similar idea, the central escalator, this elevator is for public. Everybody can use it, and it's a park. But of course, after 3 months, it's privatized. So it's again this kind of a history, what's in the private sector, what they imagine to be in the city or the society to do. I think this kind of stories finding is a very interesting way to also talk about the real estate.
Maria.
In our particular case, there's an interesting collision also between real estate and what kind of real estate it is. We sit in a federal property, but the real estate that we occupy is also a piece in the collection because we are a historic mansion as well. So there's a lot of mixes and pools and between the interests there. We are confined by the campus that is in this historic mansion, but and includes also our storage areas and a few other locations. But our mandate is national in a way where we don't have a real estate impact in other ways of properties or spaces to convey this mission more nationally. So in a way, we're trying to escape the real estate confines that we have. And we do that through a variety of formats so that you can leave the building and you're not confined to program or show or explain design just inside of this piece of real estate. But then at the same time, I'm forced to think of the recent government shutdown, and there's confines of this real estate and rules around it by which we could not enter this piece of real estate for a period of time, and our production needed to stop because of that. So a lot of ties and sort of like mixed sentiments in terms of like the physical confines that we occupy and how, what they represent, what they signal versus like the realities that we all have, I think, as museums, storage, expansion, and all of that, but very charged spaces in terms of our real estate as well.
And at the Met, we have this not unique, but a kind of very interesting context where since 1870, when we opened, we have essentially a kind of a campus. It's like a piece of miniature urbanism where the museum was not built all at once. It was built through a series of extensions, adaptations, infills, a lot of improvisation, and so we have these very kind of explicit reveals of the layers of history of the building where through some more recent renovations we have like areas of reveal of like previous exterior walls have now become internal walls. And so for those of you who know our Petrie Court, the European Sculpture Court, there's this huge oversized portal which is basically out of scale with the rest of the gallery because that was the original Fifth Avenue entrance, but that's now turned at a right angle. And so there are these moments like that in the building which make you very much aware of the kind of real estate kind of reality of how the museum has had to adapt within what is a very tight footprint. And of course, being in Central Park, we can't move an inch into the park. And so with the work with Frida that we're doing with our modern and contemporary wing, we're being very careful about the massing and respecting the Roche d'Include 1970s master plan and like dealing with Central Park and all of that. So it's a lot of constraints to work with.
Martino?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously an exhaustive question. So, I mean, I think I very much agree with you. And I think what we can do as cultural institutions, museum, is to convene conversations and to raise awareness of what's going on in the cities that we're living in and the realities. I want to, reference for us New York New Publics, the exhibition of a few years ago, where we, looked specifically at how a younger generation of architects is trying to reimagine public space as a sort of almost a counter proposition to the rapid diminishment of access to public space in a place like New York City, and also, of course, the power of the corporate world. So, for what it's worth, some of these, projects have, Peterson Ridge. We featured in with their really interesting proposal to transform NYCHA housing, make it more livable, and now Peterson Ridge is working for the Met. They're also just did our MoMA design store down in Soho. So through that, I think we can help make small changes and maybe raise awareness in the larger public.
Thank you. We're reaching the end. I do want to give the opportunity, if there are any questions, I can collect all of them right now. So this is the moment. I don't see any. So then I want to thank anyone. Should I wait longer? I want to thank everyone for being here today.